Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about a revolution that's going on in the United Kingdom right now. And that revolution is being led by one man.
A friend of mine, a lot of people say one of the most powerful men in Europe, Nigel Farage. He's a very non-controversial person too, right? That's what we're like. Come on, Nigel. He's very shy. Thank you.
Oh, I'm non-controversial and shy compared to you.
Now, as you've just seen from that banter between Nigel Farage and Donald Trump, he's quite a flamboyant character. He's very good at public speaking and introducing a little bit of personality into his speeches. And I think that differentiates himself from most of the politicians in the UK who are quite rigid and robotic and not very interesting to listen to. And up until this point in time, Nigel Farage was only really famous for one thing: Brexit.
If the little people, if the real people, if the ordinary decent people are prepared to stand up and fight for what they believe in, we can overcome the big banks. We can overcome the multinationals. We made June the 23rd our Independence Day when we smashed the establishment.
So he's talking about going against the establishment, changing things, speaking for the little guy, actually representing the masses against the way things has always been done. He mentioned big banks there. So he's referencing the big, powerful organizations that basically have all the money and the power. And he's trying to talk on behalf of the working classes and the normal people. So that was the narrative in terms of how Brexit was successful. And he's now introducing that into UK politics. And there were recent elections held in the UK. And usually you would have expected the two leading parties, Labour and Conservatives, to win most of the seats in those elections. However, Nigel Farage's newly formed Reform UK party absolutely blew everybody out of the water. They won a huge majority, and this was a landmark change in UK politics.
It's been a good night for Nigel Farage as his Reform Party seizes the parliamentary seat of Runcorn and Helsby from Labour. After a recount, there were just 6 votes in it, a new record for the smallest by-election majority since 1945.
I knew we'd do well today. I mean, I've seen the party grow. I've seen the calibre of people improve. We professionalise the way we operate, everything from our literature to data gathering. But frankly, what we're achieving in terms of council seat numbers, what has happened here in County Durham, beyond my wildest dreams. Just goes to show people are ready for real change.
So what we heard there is a much more balanced political sort of statement. So Nigel Farage is an intelligent guy who's actually went to Dulwich College, if anybody knows that, and it's a very well-established school, quite a posh school in the south of England. So he's well educated. So he's able to act as a politician, but also he can do those speeches that reach out and talk to people who basically don't want to hear all of the boring stuff. Now, this chart shows the election results for the most recent parliamentary election. So basically what we had here was Runcorn and Helsby. The previous guy who was the Member of Parliament actually had to step down because he was caught on camera beating up one of his constituents. He was out on a late night drink, and I think somebody started to give him a lot of grief, was shouting at him. So he ran over and started punching the guy, and I think he punched him 5 times, something like that. It was caught on camera. He got basically pulled up on it, and so he had to resign. So less than a year after being voted in the general election in July 2024, this seat suddenly came up for re-election. And as you can see, there was a massive landslide turning around in terms of the voting people. At the time of the previous election in July 24, Labour won, but you can see that the Labour candidate here came second, and they lost 14.2% of the vote. So there was a massive downturn in the number of people voting for Labour, and Reform increased their vote by 20.6%. And as we just heard, they won the election by only 6 votes. So if you've ever thought, my vote doesn't really count, what's the point? I'm not going to make my vote, it won't make any difference. If 7 people had have turned up and voted for Labour, 7 more people in the recent election, Labour would have won. So it tells you that your vote is absolutely critical. Never waste your vote. But the whole point here is that Reform have come from nowhere to actually win this. They've now got another Member of Parliament, so they've now got 6 in total. Nigel Farage and 4 other people won seats in the July election in 2024. they've now got the most recent one that's come available. If we have a look at this map, it shows the local council elections. So aside from that member of parliament election, there were also local council elections. And this is the local government end of the market in the UK. So basically, the local governments make decisions on where to spend their money that they're allocated on things like refuge collection and roads, those sort of things, the local authority stuff. And you can see that it wasn't the whole of the UK that was voting. It was just a portion of it. But there was a big heartland in the middle of England. And this is seen as Middle England, a really important voting area for anybody that wants to take power. And this chart shows the number of seats won by each of the different parties. Now, as you can see in the top left-hand corner here, there were 1,637 seats available for voting. And out of that, Reform UK won 677. And as you can see on the right-hand side here, compared to what they won in 2021, that was a 100% increase. They didn't win any seats at all. In the previous election in 2021, they now have 677, which is by far more than anybody else on this chart. Interestingly, the second biggest vote was for the Liberal Democrats. And the Liberal Democrats historically have been the third option that UK voters have gone to. So if you're not happy with Labour or the Conservatives, and those two parties have been in ruling power in the UK since 1922, so 103 years of continuous rule by one or the other. There have been a few coalition governments during the war and also during the Brexit period. But overall, either Labour or Conservative have had control of the UK. And the Liberal Democrats have really been that sort of protest vote. So in your area, if you know that your party, so if you're voting for the Conservatives, but you know realistically they're not going to win because Labour always win, you can vote for the Liberal Democrats and hope to do a blocking vote to stop Labour gaining power. So historically, that's sort of how it's worked. They've been the third alternative, but not really a realistic alternative in terms of gaining overall control. But they picked up 370 seats, and you can see that that was an increase of 163. So they've almost doubled the number of seats that they had from the previous election in 2021. Now, the Conservatives, who were in power until July 24, for a long period of time, and had lots of famous politician prime ministers like David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Theresa May, they picked up 317 seats, but as you can see on the right-hand side, they lost 676, which is almost the same number as Reform won. It wasn't an exact one-for-one trade-off. So they've had an absolute nightmare in these elections. They've lost. They went from over 1,000 seats, or roughly 1,000 seats, to only 317. And Labour, who are the current ruling party in the UK, they are the governing party. They only picked up 99 seats, which represented a fall of 186 against what they achieved in 2021. So what we are seeing here is a complete sea change in terms of the votes from the general public in the UK. They don't want to be voting for Labour and the Conservatives, certainly not the Conservatives. Their power has fallen massively. And we have seen a wave of support for Reform UK. They are now the clear leaders from what these results are telling us. And if we have a look at this table, it shows us which parties have overall control in the councils. So in total, there were 23 councils that we're voting for, and you need to get a majority of seats so that you can then vote through all of the things you want to get through. So it's like any political arena. You need to have a majority to be able to make sure that if you put forward something, you'll be able to get support for it. And what you can see here is that out of these 23 councils, Reform UK now have control in 10 of those councils. And obviously, they didn't have control in any of those councils previously because they didn't have any councillors. They had 0 councillors before this election. But they now control 10 of those councils. The Liberal Democrats now control 3 councils, and previously they didn't control any. So that's an increase of 3 in this area. The Conservatives, who previously were in control of 16 of these councils, now control none of them, and neither do Labour. They don't have control. They had previously control of 1 of them. So what this tells us is that 13 of the councils are being controlled by Reform and the Liberal Democrats, and 10 councils don't have an overall majority. They now have to form coalitions to get things approved. So once again, this tells us that the people of the UK don't want to vote for Conservatives or Labour, and Reform UK are the next best alternative. And what this chart shows us is the voting in percentage terms across the UK over the past 10 years. So you can see that in 2015, 35% of the UK was supportive of the Conservatives, 29% for Labour, 11% for the Liberal Democrats, and at that time, this was pre-Brexit, 13% were supportive of UKIP, which was Nigel Farage's original party before he changed and created the Reform UK party. Now, interestingly, in 2024, which was basically when the general election was held last year, there was a change, and the Conservatives, who had been in power for that time but had lost a lot of popularity because, firstly, because of Brexit, that was really badly managed. It was voted for in 2016 but didn't actually take place until 2020, so it took a long period of time to actually get anything sorted. And we saw David Cameron resign over it. We saw Theresa May come in. She failed to get Brexit approved, and so she was then replaced by Boris Johnson. He came in, managed to get Brexit done, but unfortunately he then shot himself in the foot when it came to light that during the COVID-19 pandemic, when he'd been telling everybody to stay at home, that you couldn't mix with people, that even if your parents were dying in hospital, you couldn't go to see them, all of those sort of things. It then came to light that the Conservatives had been holding parties and garden parties and having a great time, and that really went against him in terms of his popularity. So he ultimately left after a vote of no confidence. He was replaced by Liz Truss, who only lasted for 40-something days, 44 days. She then left, and then Rishi Sunak came in. He lost the general election to Labour, basically because everybody was sick of the Conservatives by that point. And at the time of the general election last year, they were seen to have 25% support. Labour at that point had 34%, which interestingly was a bit less than they'd had in the previous couple of years, but was certainly enough for them to gain power. So they got voted in, and Sir Keir Starmer became the Prime Minister of the UK. Now, interestingly, Liberal Democrats had 17%, which is broadly in line with what they'd had for the past 10 years. And then the Green Party had 13%. You can see here that Reform UK, which is shown by the turquoise section, didn't really have much support at all. They had 5 MPs that gained seats in the election in 2024, but that was a very small percentage. If we now have a look at the current situation, you can see that the Conservatives have dropped to 15%, which is the lowest by a country mile against all of the years on this chart. Labour, who are the current governing party in the UK, they're in power. They've been in power for less than a year. So you would have thought their popularity would still be high, are down to 20%, which is actually the lowest on this chart by a long way from Labour's point of view. The Liberal Democrats are still at 17%. They haven't really moved. The Green Party's at 11%, which is roughly in line with where they've been for the past few years. But Reform UK is now sitting at 30%, which is a majority compared to everybody else here. So what this tells us is that if we were having a general election in the UK right now, right at this moment in time, Reform UK would win and Nigel Farage would become the new Prime Minister. So what's going on in the UK, and why is everybody now wanting to vote for reform?
Why do you think you've done so well and Labour's vote, as you say, has collapsed?
Loss of confidence in the Labour Party. No one knows what the Prime Minister really stands for. A sense that somehow in this very patriotic constituency, the Labour Party doesn't really stand for those values anymore. A sense from working people whose alarm clocks go off at 5 o'clock in the morning that they're paying ever more taxes and they wonder why. The general feeling out there, about 2/3 of the British public think Britain is broken, that it's not working. And there's almost, regardless of who you vote for, either at local or national level, nothing ever changes. People just look at Westminster and look at failure. The Conservatives swept on a massive wave, including seats up here in the so-called Red Wall that they won. A wave of optimism. They broke virtually every major promise they made to the British people. Labour won on, frankly, an anti-Tory vote. The Prime Minister promised change. Well, no one's seeing positive change economically or socially, and people are actually getting poorer despite the claims of the government. So people want something different.
So as you've just heard, the people of the UK are discontented. They're not happy with what the Conservatives and Labour have been doing. So Nigel Farage and his Reform Party are playing up to that. But also also, Nigel Farage has been selling a message that he's anti-establishment. He wants to do things differently. He's got a rebellious nature. He wants to shake things up. So let's hear how he describes why people voted for Brexit and how he's now using that to reform UK's advantage.
Everybody said we'd lose. And what did we see? We saw experts from all over the world. We saw the International Monetary Fund. We saw Moody's. We saw Standard & Poor's. We saw global leaders giving us Project Fear, telling us that if we voted not to be run by a bunch of unelected old men in Brussels, yeah, well, it's okay. They don't like me either, so it doesn't really matter, does it? But they told us our economy would fall off a cliff. They told us there'd be mass unemployment. They told us investment would leave our country. And David Cameron, then our Prime Minister, but no longer, told us we might even get World War III. And we saw the commentariat and we saw the polling industry doing everything they could to demoralise our campaign. On the day of the vote itself, that morning, they put us 10 points behind. And actually, they were all wrong. And they were wrong because what the Brexit campaign did is we reached those people who've been let down by modern global corporatism. We reached those people who have never voted in their lives, but believe by going out and voting for Brexit, they could take back control of their country, take back control of their borders, and get back their pride and self-respect.
So what we just heard there is Nigel Farage naming a lot of the establishment. He was naming things like the big banks, S&P. He referred to the media as the commentariat, so commentators, but making them sound a bit more Russian, so a sort of very anti sort of media twist on that. But also what he did is he introduced an element of humour and likability. So he sort of said, yeah, they don't like me either. And he got a good response from the crowd. And I think that's one of the differences with Nigel Farage versus most of the other MPs in the UK is that he's showing some personality in his speaking. He's actually coming across as a very likeable figure. And actually, he's coming across as a slight rebel, a bit of a rogue, somebody who's going against what everybody else is doing. And I think a lot of the UK population are warming to that. They like him. He's coming across really well. And when you compare him to Keir Starmer, who's the current Prime Minister of the UK, it's night and day difference. He's coming across quite wooden, quite boring, not very interesting to listen to, not very charismatic, and certainly doesn't try to introduce an element of humour into many of his speeches, or if he does, I haven't seen a reaction like that.
You're a divisive politician.
Well, good. Good.
But to keep a coalition together, do you have to change anything?
I'm sorry, I'm not Mr. Bland. You know, I am who I am. Take me or leave me. I'm a straight speaker. I say what I believe, and if you like it, that's fantastic.
But what I mean
and if you don't, I don't care.
In a fast past the post system, though, people tend to win on centre ground. So they've got to build a massive coalition of voters. Yeah, but just up there, you were talking about people don't work from home. You don't like diversity on the councils. A lot of people won't like that.
What you're missing is that is the centre ground of public opinion. There's a silent majority that believes in the things that we believe in. Westminster, and dare I say it, much of the media is out of touch with where this country is moving. And I think that's what today's election results prove.
So what he's saying there is that basically what he's putting forward in terms of the Reform UK policies is in line with what the majority of people in the UK are thinking, and they're not in line with what the UK media has been promoting for the last 5 to 10 years. They've been talking the talk that the politicians have been mentioning, but they haven't been actually saying what the people in the UK want. And this is basically his whole ethos. He's saying that he's representing people who've never really had a voice because the Conservatives and Labour are doing basically the same sort of things slightly differently. He wants to shake things up. Now, interestingly, he has actually made some comments on the leaders of the Conservative and the Labour Party. And just in case you don't know, the leader of the Conservative Party is called Kemi Badenoch, and the leader of the Labour Party, who's the Prime Minister of the UK, is Sir Keir Starmer.
Kemi Badenoch, please stay. I mean, please don't resign. We want you to stay on as leader. I'll put some money in if you'd like to keep you there. No, she's got an impossible job. The Conservative Party is split. And what you'll see tomorrow, as the West Country results come in, is you'll see a stack of 2021 Conservative votes will have come to us, but also gone to the Liberal Democrats as well. The Conservatives are standing in the middle of the road in terms of their own supporters and getting hit by vehicles coming both ways. Very clear message tonight. In much of this country, if you vote Conservative, you will get Labour. And what tonight does is it embeds us. We now are the opposition party in the United Kingdom to the Labour Party, and the Tories, frankly, are a waste of space. This Robert Jenrick idea that somehow we're going to merge. I only do deals with people if I shake their hands, look them in the eye and trust them. After what the Conservatives did after 2019, I don't trust them. They are toast. You're witnessing the end of a party that's been around since 1832. It's disappearing. And to Sir Keir, well, just keep going. You're making life easy.
So what Nigel Farage is saying there is that the Conservative Party is finished. He's saying that they're dead in the water as credible opposition to Labour. And this is somebody who was actually a member of the Conservative Party back when he was a teenager, when he first started out in politics. But he also went on to say that Keir Starmer should carry on doing what he's doing because he's playing into Reform UK's hands. And what we're hearing here is that basically the Conservatives and Labour aren't really delivering in terms of what the general public wants in the UK. And if this carries on for the next 4 years, then Reform UK is going to be in a very strong position when it comes to the next general election. And also what we saw there are further examples of Nigel Farage using his humour, coming across as quite an amicable chap. He's sort of making jokes at the expense of the leaders of the other parties. You don't really see the other politicians in the UK doing that. And that's one of the reasons I think why he's gaining in popularity. However, he is a controversial character, as Donald Trump mentioned at the start of today's video. He has been linked with a lot of controversial policies. And one of those is immigration. That was obviously one of the bedrocks for the Brexit campaign. There was a lot of talk about the freedom of movement in the European Union and the fact that the people from the 27 other countries could move to the UK. And he went to great lengths to say that that was detrimental to the UK economy and for UK jobs, and potentially was one of the reasons why he got voted in. There were some quite controversial posters used as part of the Brexit campaign. And Nigel Farage is now bringing immigration back to the fore as part of the Reform UK policies.
You said that the councils that Reform run are now no longer going to allow the government to house illegal migrants coming over on boats claiming asylum. You're not going to allow them to be housed in your local area.
I said we fight them.
Yeah, can you just explain that? Because that was a new piece of information to me.
Yeah, so basically central government scatters young males who cross the English Channel around the country, and most come pro rata to the northeast and the northwest, and they're imposed upon councils, and councils kind of, in theory, have to accept them, where they're going to find a much more robust response here.
Can you stop it, though?
We give it a go.
You're going to give it...
But I promise you that the fact there are 750 young men who've illegally crossed the English Channel living in this constituency alone, it's a sense of fairness and what's right and what's wrong, bordering, I would say, even on resentment. And we pick that up very strongly on the doors for people who voted Labour for all of their lives.
So I guess the big question here is it feasible that Nigel Farage could be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
But back in Westminster, when you were saying I will be the next Prime Minister, a lot of people thought that was ludicrous. And you were being audacious and it wasn't believable. What do you say to them now?
They're not laughing now, are they? They've seen. This is Reform Quake. That's what's going on across the country today. These are the most astonishing set of local election results in the history of our country.
So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening in the UK at the moment does represent a genuine revolution in UK politics. For the past 100 years, the UK has had two options in terms of a realistic government choice, either the Conservatives or Labour. They have been in power consistently for the last 100 years. So realistically, if you were voting, you'd always lean one way or the other. There has been some tactical voting and people trying to block Labour or Conservatives getting in their local area by voting for the Liberal Democrats or the Greens or something like that. And they've got a handful of MPs. But of the 650 MPs, the majority are still Conservative and Labour. And in the last election, Reform UK only got 5 MPs out of 650, so that's less than 1%. So they were nowhere, they were lost in the roundings. However, over the course of the last 12 months, things have changed materially because we've seen Labour taking over control of the country and things really haven't gone well. So they came out quite early and said that their manifesto is based on basically never increasing taxes. They weren't going to increase taxes. What they wanted to do was grow the economy, and then they would use the money that they were getting from that increased growth to fund all of their spending. Unfortunately, the growth hasn't come through anywhere near as strongly as they wanted it to, and there are now question marks as to how they're going to fund all of their plans, whether or not they will raise taxes, or if they're going to have to cut all of their budgets and introduce austerity. But either way you look at it, in a very short space of time, people have lost confidence. They're not feeling good about voting Labour in. And as Nigel Farage said earlier in the video, he believes that Labour were successful in the last election because it was an anti-Conservative vote. People didn't want the Conservatives to get back in, and so they were voting for Labour as being the only other realistic choice. But as we've seen from the recent election results, Reform UK is now a viable option. They've absolutely smashed everybody in these elections. It was a landslide victory. They have got the biggest majority by far. They gained 677 seats. And this time 4 years ago, they had 0. So they've gone from nowhere to being the leading party. And one of the main reasons for that is Nigel Farage. As we've seen in today's video, he's charismatic. He likes to introduce humour into his speeches. He says controversial things. He comes up with policies that maybe a lot of people are thinking about, but none of the main parties are promoting. Or if they do, it tends to be a much more watered down version. So he's talking about immigration. He's saying he's going to stop the deployment of all of these illegal immigrants who are coming in seeking asylum all across the UK. He's going to object to that in terms of all of the councils that Reform are now running. So some quite controversial policies, but it's striking a chord with a lot of people in the UK. And in the same way that Labour got in because everybody was sick of the Conservatives in 2024, I think at the moment everybody's sick of both the Conservatives and Labour. Labour haven't covered themselves in glory since they've taken over. And I think Nigel Farage is really rising in prominence. He's obviously been quite a high-profile figure because of the Brexit campaign. And as we saw, he's spoken on a couple of Donald Trump's campaigns in the past. So he's quite high profile already. He was actually on a TV show called I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here not that long ago in the UK. So he's quite familiar with the UK public. He's a good speaker. He comes across, he's talking from the heart. He's trying to sell a story that he's a rebel. He's going against the establishment. He's going to shake things up, do things differently. And I think there is a very real chance that if things continue as they are, if Labour continues not doing a great job, and if the economy continues struggling for the next few years, which it looks likely given what's happening in the USA, then Nigel Farage is going to become further and further ahead in the league tables, and there is a very real chance that he could be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, which would be an absolute revolution in political terms because Reform UK didn't even exist 5 years ago. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button because I'm trying to get to 500,000. I'm miles away at the moment, but it doesn't cost you anything. But just if you can hit that button, that would be great. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. And thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, really, really appreciate that. And if you're a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or buy me a coffee membership or YouTube membership, thank you for that support. Really helps to keep me motivated. And here's something to put a smile on your face.